Thanks, Lindsay. We are following snow squalls in Atlantic Canada through this morning. It's really being driven by very gusty winds in the wake of the low that blew through the region yesterday. West coast of Newfoundland through the Avalon Peninsula, portions of Corner Brook and mainland Nova Scotia seeing the squalls this morning. We'll take you live to Corner Brook. This view courtesy of NTV. How's it looking? We have one that brought all of that active weather over the last couple of days. That's now sitting up farther north, pushing up toward Baffin Island and Iqaluit. In the wake of this, the winds are really gusty across much of the west coast of Newfoundland, down toward the southwest, portions of Cape Breton. We're already seeing schools affected in communities across Cape Breton, so make sure you're checking with your board before kids are heading out today. We'll also see squalls across the Burin Peninsula and portions of the Avalon Peninsula, both in the south and the north for St. John. So widespread snow squall warnings this morning, blowing snow advisories. How fast will the winds be? Well, we'll see anywhere between 30 to 50 centimeters of snow, which in itself is a lot. But then you add on winds that are between 70 to 80, perhaps up to 140 kilometers an hour, and there's going to be reduced visibility. I think that goes without saying. Even if there's no snow actively falling, just the sheer amount of wind, any snow that's still powdery will be blowing and drifting. Lots of sunshine in our maritime provinces, but man, it is cold this morning, and it's going to be cold right throughout the day today. Snow squalls will persist into Friday as well. Labrador, you're in a position where you see more organized snowfall as opposed to squalls, so it's more widespread. But within these squalls, as you know, you either go from like blue sky or whiteout conditions quite rapidly, that transition happening with very little notice. So in terms of temperature, here's where we're at. We're seeing that return to kind of deep cold across the prairies due to the presence of an Arctic front that moved through. So into the minus 20s and deep minus 20s for Winnipeg, even toward Thunder Bay as well. We've got extreme cold warnings across portions of northern Ontario. It's cold in Ottawa and Montreal this morning, and Fredericton sitting at minus 13. But when we look at the wind chill values, you really see what you're going to contend with as you head outside. It's feeling into the minus 20s across portions of our maritime provinces, into the deep minus 30s across Saskatchewan, Manitoba, northern Ontario. Yellowknife feeling like minus 40. We've got widespread warnings this morning across the region due to the cold, but also all the active weather. Now, that big upper low has swung its way towards Atlantic Canada. What we see building in behind is an upper ridge through portions of BC and Alberta, and that's going to help improve the temperature. I mean, it's still January, it's still going to be cold, but we're seeing a departure of that extreme cold, especially into next week, and temperatures right across the country begin to moderate. Now, for the BC coast, we know that it's going to be wet, especially later on today. There was a whole whack of snow yesterday. We talked about that. But now, upstream, we've got more systems moving into the region, and so it does mean several days of active weather. Now, the rain and snow begins in Vancouver Island later on this afternoon. It's relatively drier elsewhere in the region. A bit of snow tracking across portions of Saskatchewan, Manitoba. Watch out well. Make sure you're just doing like short pee breaks for them today and bring them right back in. In terms of the upper low, it is traveling its way eastward, and that kind of most concentrated cold air begins to swing back up to northern Canada, to the poles as we go into the weekend. What builds in behind is this upper ridge. You can see our jet stream, this green line here, gets this little kind of hill in it. That's indicative of milder air beginning to move its way northward. Now, for areas like Ontario and Quebec, you'll first see that warm up by Sunday. Until we get there, though, remember, it's only Thursday, Friday, Saturday, still quite cold and windy. We've got today southwesterly winds really driving the likelihood of snow squalls. Now, these winds are cold. They're traveling over the relatively warmer waters of the Great Lakes. They pick up all that moisture and they dump it out on the other side. So where we're already seeing them is on the shores of Huron and Georgian Bay, but there's the likelihood of seeing those squalls develop along the shores of Lake Erie and Ontario as the day progresses. Blowing and drifting snow is going to be one of the biggest factors. If you are traveling on any of the highways, just be prepared to be dealing with perhaps whiteout conditions today. Weather advisories for all areas in the orange as well. And the squalls continue through today and tomorrow as well. Again, we're really not seeing the warm up in these two provinces until we hit Sunday. I want to take you to Cape Breton if we can. This view courtesy of Nova Scotia. Number of schools affected by the snow in Cape Breton. We're also seeing schools impacted both for younger students and university-age students in portions of the BC coast. So make sure, again, you're checking with your school if you have class scheduled for today. Temperature-wise, it is really cold through the center of Canada as you go from northern Ontario westward toward that Alberta-Saskatchewan boundary. Yellowknife sitting at minus 30. The wind chill is minus 41. Winnipeg, you also have a wind chill of minus 41 this morning. There are some extreme cold warnings that I don't actually include Winnipeg. They probably should at this point. These warnings coming from Environment Canada in the areas of the pale blue. So you see the air temperature, you add on the wind, and that's what it's feeling like this morning. So at this point, exposed skin has a high risk of developing frostbite if you are outside for an extended period of time. For Northern Ontario, there are the air temperatures flipping over to the wind chill values, feeling into the deep -30s for many communities. Now, there is going to be a warm up as this kind of concentrated Arctic air moves its way eastward. It modifies a little bit, and then it slides its way back up to Northern Canada. What builds in behind is this upper ridge that helps to drive a warm up through first the prairies and then eventually kind of pushes that cold air out of Ontario and Quebec. And that doesn't happen until Sunday. So we're still a few days off of that where you can prepare for kind of the cold weather to continue. Now, for Western Canada, there's another plume of moisture hitting the BC coastline. This Pacific frontal system arriving through this afternoon, and that is going to bring another round of very strong winds. We'll also see the likelihood of snow, and that's brand new. Just issued a freezing rain warning, which means obviously that there's going to be the risk of ice development on untreated surfaces. Freezing rain develops when you have warmer air kind of sandwiched between below freezing air above and below freezing air at the surface. That warmer air in the middle causes a snowflake to fully melt, but as it hits that sub-freezing layer of air right at the surface, the temperature of the water droplet dips below freezing. So the second it hits the surface, ice forms. Ice can't just form, you need it to form on something, so hence why it will develop on the surface. Now, we'll see the snow spread across Vancouver Island through today. Areas along that Pacific coast are likely to stay as rain, or at least kind of mixing those kind of wetter snowflakes that fall almost slushy. The snow will continue through the evening, spread into Vancouver. This pink here, that's the risk of freezing rain. So you can see the warmer air kind of probably right at sea level. As you head up into the higher terrain, North Van, for example, you're likely to see that transition toward freezing rain and then snow on top of that. And that spreads right through the interior through Friday. That's part of what drives the warm up in Alberta, Saskatchewan, eventually pushing eastward as both the surface level and the higher atmosphere levels kind of work in combination to flush out this colder air and provide a milder forecast into next week. We're going to talk more about that coming up. Plus, we'll detail the squalls that are persisting in both Ontario and Atlantic Canada. For now, here's a look at what you can expect today. Highest amounts will be in the Channel Port aux Basques region. You'll also see the highest wind gusts along the west coast of Newfoundland. For squalls, we've got widespread warnings in the blue and watches in the pink. The big difference here would be a watch is more like all your ingredients for cookies, for example, are laid out on the counter. You don't have cookies quite yet, but you're ready to make them. The warning would be like cookies are coming out of the oven and you're ready to eat them. That's the big difference there. So that'll persist through today. We've got a winter storm warning along the coastline of Labrador, plus widespread blowing snow advisories just due to the wind. There is some more consistent snow right on the top of your map here through northern Quebec and Labrador. Elsewhere in the region, it's either super sunny and cold and windy in our maritime provinces, or you have the squalls. And the squalls do persist through today, through tonight, and into Friday as well, at least for the first half of the day. Now, for Ontario and Quebec, we also have squalls. There's a little bit of consistent snow happening in southwest and southern Ontario, but the biggest zones, the risky areas for squalls would be off the eastern shores of both Lake Huron and Georgian Bay, and then possibly on the northeastern shore of Lake Erie and for portions of Prince Edward County along the shore of Lake Ontario. That's where we have the watch in effect. We also have a weather advisory just saying like, hey, you've got winter driving conditions in effect. That's going to persist right throughout the day today. If you don't see snow, you will see very gusty winds, so watch out for extended wind chills. Now here's a look at your local forecast.